The 2012 Cadillac CTS-V comes supercharged straight from the factory, packing quite a punch. But when you start cranking up that power beyond stock, like this vehicle with the awe-inspiring Lingenfelter 630 horsepower package, things can get a little dicey, especially if you're relying on worn-out OEM components to handle the extra output. This particular Lingenfelter package includes a few awesome add-ons like the 2.55-inch diameter 10-bolt supercharger drive pulley and hub, the Gates HD 8-rib serpentine belt, and the Lingenfelter LSA solid supercharger isolator coupling. They also do a bit of port and polish action to the supercharger snout and modify the airbox, which uses their proprietary intake duct with a K&N air filter. Throwing in a 160-degree thermostat for some extra cooling, and you can expect a 4 psi boost over stock, giving you 12 pounds at a conservatively rated 630 crank horsepower. But you can't really have a good story unless there's a little challenge, right? Recently, we had a customer come in experiencing a rough run in a pesky check engine light. After scanning the vehicle, a fault code of P069E for the fuel pump module was revealed. Occasional hard starts became a concern, and luckily, the owner managed to avoid calling a tow truck and brought it to us in time. Now, it's well known that the fuel pumps on these vehicles can be a bit troublesome, even if you're under 50,000 miles. And let's not forget, we've also got some of those modifications Lingenfelter made to the engine, boosting its power by a modestly rated 75 horsepower. So with the up demand, it was only a matter of time before those problematic pumps started acting up. Even so, we still ran the necessary diagnostics to confirm we were dealing with failing pumps. Here's the catch. Getting to the fuel pump access lid is no easy task. You're supposed to drop the tank, which means dealing with the exhaust, drive shaft, rear subframe, and the driveline. It's a labor-intensive process that can take hours and tons of money, not to mention the potential of risk of flex, sealing issues, and corrosion down the line. But is there another solution? Quick access from the top might be a smart option here. I really cringe at the thought of chopping into the body of a nice Cadillac. This car could be potentially a collector's item one day. However, the car's already modified, so with the upgrades to the power of the vehicle, the pulley, the fuel system had to come next, and the owner might end up doing more upgrades in the future, meaning that we might have to go a little bit further with the fuel system. So having an access port in there is just going to be smart long-term. We just got to make sure we do it in a way that doesn't degrade the structure or the value of the vehicle. So what we decided on for replacement are the DW300s from Dashworks. Now, these fuel pumps are drop-in fitment specifically designed for the 2009 through 15 Cadillac CTS-V. Unlike other existing pump upgrades, these pumps support simplicity, cost-effectiveness, and reliable fuel delivery. They could even support up to 800 horsepower on pump gas or 700 horsepower with the right parts and conversion tuning for those interested in switching to E85. Now, before we proceed, a cautionary note to those attempting this: will need to exercise extreme caution when disassembling the components as you are cutting into the vehicle near the fuel system. One wrong move and you're dealing with a very silly insurance claim. Do your research, as there are lots of information out there for where to cut safely, and start your cuts to make sure this doesn't become an issue. With the access port cut away, getting the lid off can be a little tricky within the confines of the car, but we can find a way with a little creative prying. Now, if you're doing these drop-in pumps, you really need to make sure that you're taking care not to damage the carrier assembly for the pump, because if anything breaks on this thing is junk, and you're going to be getting a whole new carrier assembly at the dealer in order to replace this. Which means this job you might have been able to save some money on by just replacing the pumps just became doubly expensive. And with the pump out of the car, we're going to put it on the bench and just make sure we're taking that same caution when we start disassembling this, not to break any components. So take your time and be extra careful throughout this process to avoid any unnecessary expenses. Lots of little plastic clips need to come apart along the way, and a lot of caution needs to be taken when pulling apart any of these plastic components, as they can be brittle and they're very difficult to order on their own. With everything apart, installation is reverse of assembly, You basically take the old pumps out and you stick the new ones back in there and just make sure everything's sealed, on tight, and in its place. With the pump in place back down in the tank, the swing arm for the fuel level sensor in the proper location, you can go ahead and start putting on the seal and making sure everything's nice and tightly connected. Check for leaks by keying on, and if everything looks and sounds good, you're good to try to start it up. Billy ended up using the old template from the piece we cut out in order to make a new panel. Now, while there's some aftermarket options for panels to cover this up, we went ahead, as we're a fab shop, and had Billy make something that we ended up being really proud of. A nice panel out of aluminum, fits really well, and it bolts down with some sound deadening on the underside to ensure that this thing is basically factory and structural as well. And of course, while this is all going on, the doors are acting up, not opening from the inside or the outside, and we get locked out. Luckily, we've got a lockout kit always on handy here at FMU, but it's not something that we really want to do because there's always the risk of either breaking the window or scratching the car up. But I will say we're pretty experienced at doing this. I gotta say, fishing the keys out of a car is probably one of the most rewarding experiences after messing with something like this for a long time. But of course, we're not going to be able to leave it like this. We're going to have to fix the door handles, the door switches. Let's see if we could take a look at that here in a little bit. And of course, just because we're finished doesn't mean we're finished. While trying to get out of the car, I noticed that this button is intermittently acting up for releasing the door. Now, GM decided that the car would not have traditional door handles, but rather buttons that actuate the door to open and close. And those can be problematic, both from the button side and the actuator side. And luckily they have releases here at the bottom, but this button here tends to act up, gum up. So I'm gonna try to see if I can get it apart and clean it up real quick before we let this car go. Let's take it inside. So I've seen these buttons on other various GM products have issues where the contacts don't quite connect with the buttons. So taking this apart, let's see if I can do this without breaking it. So now that I got that open, I've got to try to take this apart one more time. That was a little easier. You can see these areas are kind of discolored. Typically, if I clean those off, I can get the contact to form again and the button will be as good as new. Flipping this little rubber piece inside out here. I don't know if this is gummed up, carbon, what it is, but it cleans off with a solvent. All right, let's put it back together. Before I snap everything back into place here, let's just test it with the door. Oh, look at that. Sometimes it works out easy like that, sometimes it doesn't. That's one more creature comfort that we were able to do for the customer that they'll notice. That didn't take us too long. Probably won't even charge them for it. Cool. And with everything good, you're free to go ahead and fire it up. And if everything's running well, you can go ahead and clear faults and take it for a ride. All in all, I'd say we got a pretty successful outcome. Not only did we fix an issue the customer was having with his vehicle stalling out, but we also laid the groundwork for some potential upgrades in the future and did a pretty nice patch panel that's going to allow us to get in there if anything comes up in the future, or we want to dial in the fuel pressure once the mods start coming. Well, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time at FMU.